Shortly after the shutdown of its servers, Ubisoft has revoked licenses for The Crew, which ultimately introduced this here website, Stop Killing Games. We as gamers willfully and willingly destroy what we would call the representation of the preservation of video games on a daily basis.
Downloadable content.
Microtransactions.
DRM.
Pre-order DLC.
Dislike content. Blind. Stupid fucking fanboyism.
What's up, gamers? Welcome to Gamer Rant. My name's Kevin. In today's nightly episode that I decided to record after work, so I listened to this video today that was released by Yang Yang yesterday. Ubisoft steal the crew from players' libraries after shutting down servers and revoking a license. And then, of course, we have, shortly after the shutdown of its servers, Ubisoft has revoked licenses for The Crew. And then, of course, this website, Stop Killing Games, has also been mentioned. And my question is, why does Ubisoft feel that they can do this? Why? Because of gamers. I know nobody likes that, but that's the reality of it. Everything gamers have done tells publishers and developers that maybe we're not always on board with the idea of game preservation. Look at day one updates. That is the complete opposite of what we would call gamers wanting or banding together for game preservation, because that is the complete polar opposite. You look at something like microtransactions or DLC. Again, that is the polar opposite of what we would call game preservation. And yet, there are gamers that support it, either directly or indirectly. Gamers throughout the years since the PS3 360 era have ultimately talked a big game about game preservation. But yet, when it comes to the nitty-gritty of it, we do so much that goes against the idea and philosophy of what game preservation should be and was back in the day, you know, when games were released complete. But nowadays, what's the biggest things that we hear? Some latest articles that you can hear? Well, digital gaming's pretty popular. That is literally gamers speaking to developers. We want a digital only. We don't like owning our games. We like renting them because that is a convenience. But then we'll complain when, you know, we can't play them, because the company decided to remove them, because it's either unprofitable or the business can't sustain it without, there's no revenue there. We have done this since the start of the PS3 360 era, when DLCs and then later in that lifespan, microtransactions would be introduced. One of the arguments that I brought up was this whole idea that fits into what we call game preservation, where that basically the biggest problem with these day one updates and these micro bullshit is that eventually we're going to have incomplete art, incomplete games. It's not like the servers are going to be up forever, which means at some point in time, this shit's going to be lost. And now, in this modern age, we dive into a more erroneous thing that some gamers probably haven't noticed, but you don't see a lot of, what is it? Complete editions. That was something that was pretty prevalent in the PS3 360 era, where a game would be released, they would release expansions, they might have some bullshit DLC, and they also release an expansion, and at some point, there is now a complete edition. That is something that is ultimately rare, and yet what has still happened? What has continued? Some games actually have expansion packs, but those expansion packs are digital only. I guess you could say that I kind of find this a little bit hypocritical of gamer. Not the individual who started the website, but just gamers as a whole who want to talk about game preservation, and we do this a lot. People always talk about how Nintendo sucks fat fucking dick for their lack of game preservation. But it's like, well, what are gamers doing to, you know, help preserve games? We're not doing a lot of things, and we haven't done a lot of good things that actually could evaluate to that. This is probably the first thing. And even then, I would say it's lackluster at best, because that still correlates to a whole bunch of other games that will eventually become broken and useless. And now we've come to a point where a publisher is like, yeah, and gamers are like, wait, what the fuck? And yet, You know, when I first started this channel, the one basis that I constantly told people was the negative effect of day one update. That this was going to hurt gaming in the long run because this is going to create an incomplete game in the future after the servers go down and the updates are no longer up. But gamers didn't care, and they don't care because it doesn't directly affect them now. It's no different than microtransactions. This is stuff, regardless of what you think about it, is going to at some point be lost when there's only physical copies of said game. But gamers don't care here in the now because it doesn't affect them. Now we have something that, of course, is directly affecting gamers, and therefore people are worried about game preservation. But yet, through years, gamers have done nothing but tell publishers and developers that we don't care about game preservation. And this is why this had to be a thing, and this is why this even exists. Because gamers throughout generations, starting from the PS3 360 era, accepted day one updates, which goes completely against the whole ideology of game preservation, and microtransactions and DLC, which of course also go against the ideology of game preservation. People vitriolized Electronic Arts for their single-player DRM in SimCity, but gamers did not vitriolize Warner Brothers games or NetherRealms when they did that same thing for Mortal Kombat 11. So it goes to show the hypocrisy of gamers. It goes to show that gamers only really give a shit when it directly affects them because they're not thinking about the long haul after you're fucking dead and gone. And to me, it's like, what's the difference? I don't see a difference. I want people now to be able to enjoy games in the far future as well. So this is the complete opposite of game preservation. And it all is just a culmination of gamers doing what they do best. Doing nothing. That there's a difference between a Super Nintendo game that people will be able to put in any kind of generic Super Nintendo in the 10 years, 20, 30, 50 years from now and still be able to play it. But yet any modern game that is made today on a disc or even a Switch cartridge will not have an update or any of the extra content that was released digitally for that game. But at the end of the day, we're just speaking to the choir. I've said this kind of shit back in 2012 and 2013, and gamers do what they do best. They don't listen because they don't care until it directly affects them. And now that they have a game that the publisher and developer is basically like, yeah, you don't get to play this anymore, even though you paid for it, now they're bitching. It's the nature of the beast. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video in some fashion or form. Remember, gamers, if not voicing your thoughts, concerns about the bullshit in gaming, the bullshit gamers do and say, or the lack that thereof, you just might be a part of the motherfucking problem.